Cooper on the Case. A Masonic Authors Guild International production.
The Mystery of the French Theologian. This, the first in a series of investigations, was inspired by a light-hearted comment by my fellow Magi, Mark Tabbert, who said that a photograph of me looked like I was a detective on the hunt for the perpetrator of a crime, some shady deal, or an altogether different sort of case, a case of whiskey. In this podcast, I explain how I, as a historian, investigate various claims made by writers regarding their written versions of the past. I examine the sources they use as proof, as presented by them in numerous books and other publications. First, allow me to pose an elementary question. You appear in court, accused of murder, and stand in the dock while the charges are read out. The first witness is called and is asked by the prosecution if they can identify who committed the murder. The witness points at you and says, quote, "Yes, he did it," close quote, and then the jury finds you guilty. The judge sentences you to death or life in prison, depending on where the murder was committed. Overly dramatic, yes, but only for the purposes of emphasis. Let us consider how that relates to writing about the past, specifically about the history of Freemasonry and how footnotes are relevant. It is simply not enough to make a statement for it to be accepted as fact and for a verdict of guilty to be reached. This is why I wish to examine the purpose, in fact the need, for footnotes or endnotes to be included in any book, article or paper, etc. To put it succinctly, footnotes are there not to provide opinions. They are there to provide facts and where those facts had been obtained. But most importantly, they are provided so that these can be checked by anyone and who can then be satisfied that they are correct, valid and relevant to the book, paper, etc. in which they are contained. Before my training as a historian, I would never have thought to question the accuracy of footnotes. Today it's quite normal for non-historians to accept that footnotes need not be questioned, as to do otherwise would be to challenge the integrity of the author. It is worth giving a prime example of when footnotes do not serve their stated purpose. In the book The Temple in the Lodge by Michael Bajan and Richard Lee, published in 1989, they quote on page 165 and on page 228 of the 1997 paperback edition. The Masonic author A. E. Waite, 1847 to 1942, in support of the claim that the Knights Templar continued to exist after their official abolition by the Church in 1312. The footnote in question, 4 in the paperback edition, reads, and I quote, "Waite, A New Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, Volume 2, page 223. Waite's statement, as used by Bajan and Lee, is quoted here in full. Quote, "It has been said that Dom Calmet has lent the authority of his name to 3 important statements. 1. That John Claverhouse, Viscount Dundee, was the Grand Master of the Order of Templars in Scotland. That when he fell at Killiecrankie on July 27th, 1689, he wore the Grand Cross of the Order. 3. That this cross was given to Calmet by his brother. If this story be true, we are brought at once into the presence of a Templar survival or restoration, which owes nothing to the dream and realities of Chevalier Ramsay, and nothing to Masonry itself." Close quote. When we turn to Waite's New Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, published in London in 1921, we find that he stated the following, quote, "It has been said that the well-known French historian and theologian Dom Calmet has lent the authority of his name to 3 important statements. 1. That John Claverhouse, Viscount Dundee, was the Grand Master of the Order of Templars in Scotland. 2. That when he fell at Killiecrankie on July 27th, 1689, he wore the Grand Cross of the Order. 3. That this cross was given to Calmet by his brother. If this story be true, we are brought at once into the presence of a Templar survival or restoration, which owes nothing to the dream and realities of Chevalier Ramsay, nothing to the passion for the high degrees of Masonry, and nothing, so far as can be told, to Masonry itself, whether operative or speculative." Close quote. It is obvious that these two quotes are not the same. 4 parts have been removed by Bajan and Lee from Waite's statement, as reproduced in their book, The Temple and the Lodge. We shall now consider those omissions in sequence. 1. Quote, "The well-known French historian and theologian," close quote. Why omit that Calmet was a well-known French historian and theologian? Unfortunately, we cannot know with any certainty why they did so, but we can see one important consequence of their omission. Calmet is a fairly uncommon name in France, but with only a surname and without an occupation or reputation to work with, it would have been impossible to find the correct Calmet among the thousands who bear that name. It should be noted that Dom is an honorific addition akin to Mr., that is, Mr. Calmet. However, because Waite informs us that he was a well-known French historian and theologian, although not provided by Bajan and Lee, he is much easier to trace, as there was only one person by that name and of that status in the period concerned. I can now confirm his full name and titles and date of birth and death are the Right Reverend Abbot Don Antoine Augustine Calmet, OSB, that is the Order of St. Benedict, born 1672 and died 1757, and was the abbot of Sinens. By misquoting Waite, the only way for historians to check the source of the information supplied by Bajan and Lee was by checking Waite's original statement, and this is what I did. However, Waite does not give any information as to the source of his statements, as previously explained, but he supplies a major clue that Calmet was a well-known French historian and theologian. We can go further back and track what more is known about Calmet and his alleged connection with Knights Templar and Freemasonry. From this it can be seen that Calmet and his story of a Grand Master of the Order of Knights Templar was alive in 1689, 377 years after it was officially dissolved by the Church. It was used as proof that the Knights Templar continued to exist. The second omission from Bajan and Lee's book is, quote, "nothing to the passion for the high grades of Masonry," close quote. By removing these words from Waite's comments, Bajan and Lee cut the alleged connection with Freemasonry and the so-called higher degrees. This supports their claim that the medieval order of Knights Templar, founded in 1118, had and has a continuous, albeit secret, existence to the present day. The third deletion appears at first glance to be mundane and unimportant. The deleted words are, quote, "so far as can be told," close quote. Why remove them? Well, I would argue because their omission removes the doubt that Waite is expressing, and thus makes his statement, for Bajan and Lee's purposes, more definite and without doubt. 4. The fourth and last deletion from Waite's statement is, quote, "whether operative and speculative," close quote. Deleting the words "whether operative and speculative" removes Waite's observations that there were 2 types of Masonry, operative and speculative, and this saves Bajan and Lee the need to explain what they are and what is the difference between the two. This, therefore, simplifies their argument and at the same time reinforces their notion that the Knights Templar had a direct linear descent from 1118 to the present, unconnected with any form of Masonry. Conclusion. From the footnotes provided by the authors, I was able to examine the sources that they said they used during the writing of the book. By following one foot, it led me to their source, A.E. Waite, that they had in fact used, but it revealed that they, Bajan and Lee, had manipulated Waite's text. It is that manipulation which has been examined in detail in this podcast. In reading the source quoted in Waite's footnote, I was able to find earlier sources that he had used, but here I must conclude part 1 of this podcast. The work of the historical detective is never done. Watch this space for more from Cooper on the case.
Cooper on the case. This podcast is for educational purposes and perhaps entertainment. While the Masonic Authors Guild International provides the most accurate information possible, listeners use the information at their own risk. This podcast and its contents are Magi's properties, as are all the opinions and information it presents. Robert L.D. Cooper, Mark A. Tabbertson, any other speakers' views and opinions within the podcast do not represent nor speak for Freemasonry, any Masonic organization, their former or current employers in any way, shape, or form. Magi, Cooper, or Tabbert will not compensate you in any way whatsoever if you happen to ever suffer an inconvenience due to the information herein contained.